Reza Khan sat at his desk, unmoving, lost in thought as the hours slipped by. The weight of his decision pressed down on him. The decision was not one that would alter the fate of the nation or shift the tides of his regime, yet for him, it carried more weight. This was a personal issue for him, a choice that would reverberate through generations. Reza Khan had to pick a name. Throughout the Qajar dynasty, Iranians, much like the ancient Arab world, had their own peculiar naming system. They identified themselves through traditional methods rooted in lineage, occupation, geography, religion, or tribal affiliations. In a large oral culture with decentralized governance, people did not require fixed family names for identification. Instead, they relied on patronymic customs referring to someone by their father's or ancestor's name. In some cases, a person's profession shaped their identity. Individuals were commonly known by their trade or craft, like Najjar, carpenter, or Attar, herbalist. Religious titles also played a significant role in naming conventions. For example, those who completed the pilgrimage to Mecca earned the honorific Haji, while alleged descendants of the Prophet Muhammad were given the revered title Sayyid. Among tribal communities, particularly in rural areas, individuals identified themselves by their tribal affiliation, such as belonging to the Bakhtiari, Kashkai, or Qajar tribes. Within the noble and elite community, awarded titles were a significant part of the traditional naming system. These titles, often granted by the monarchy, served not only as markers of social status, but also as symbols of power and political privilege. Individuals from influential families or those who served in high-ranking administrative or military roles were awarded titles that reflected their rank, responsibilities, or favor with the ruling monarch. For example, Qavam al-Sultaneh meant strength of the monarchy, or Sardar Sepa, which meant commander of the army and was awarded to Reza Khan himself. Titles like this were often hereditary or remained attached to influential individuals across generations, becoming informal family identifiers. These systems were deeply embedded in Iran's pre-modern social fabric. This patchwork of identification methods posed challenges for modern governance and record-keeping. The lack of standardized surnames became a barrier to implementing state institutions and reforms, which required more systematic control. On May 5, 1925, the Parliament approved a broad and important piece of legislation. Through this law, all titles, civilian, trade-related, religious, and pseudo-military, were revoked. All Iranians, old and young, were now required to select a family name. A surname that would continue through generations and be used as their tracking ID in the newly established registrar offices. In the past decade, the titles awarded to individuals for various reasons had become so many and so unnecessary that they had lost all their significance and meaning. Anyone could get an honorary title from the Qajar kings by donating some gold, doing a favor for the monarchy, or simply delighting the kings in any way. The law of identity and personal status aimed at curbing this unnecessary overuse of prestigious titles. It was about grounding the nation into a more structured system of recognition. Reza Khan himself had decided to give up on the Sardar Sepa title to set an example. But now he had to pick a family name, one that would reverberate through generations, carving its place into the legacy of his bloodline. After hours of deliberation, he settled on a name, recommended to him by his confidants. The name embodied centuries of history, tradition, and prestige. It was an ancient language that old kings of Persia spoke and aligned with Reza's nationalistic view and his goal to revert his country to its past golden glory. It was a name that Reza hoped one day he would rule the country with. This time, not based on tribal affiliation, religious beliefs, or ethnic belongings, but on pure personal ambition. One that would reflect the rise of a simple soldier who had united a shattered country out of chaos. The Prime Minister signed the papers with his new name and glanced at the drying ink that reflected his new identity. Reza of the House Pahlavi. Hi, my name is Oriana, and you're listening to The Lion and the Sun, a modern history of Iran. On October 31st, 1925, Majlis, with an overwhelming majority, voted on abolishing the Qajar dynasty. In the name of the welfare of the people of Iran, Parliament hereby declares the abolition of the Qajar dynasty. It, within the bounds of the Constitution and other prevailing laws of Iran, entrusts the provisional government to Reza Khan. The determination of the form of the permanent government shall rest with the Constituent Assembly, which shall be held for the purpose of amending Articles 36, 37, 38, and 40 of the Constitution. As soon as these words were spoken, multiple protocols put forth by the Prime Minister got activated. Reza Khan, the soon-to-be king, resigned from his Prime Minister position, and Mohammad Foroughi, the finance minister of his government, became the acting Prime Minister. The Minister of Interior informed all provinces and their governors of the new ruling of Majlis and the change in political systems. The Foreign Minister did the same, but for all foreign legations. While the government was busy with its bureaucracy, the army took over the royal palaces, getting rid of all relics of Qajar rule and evicting all its residents. One of the residents was Mohammad Hassan Mirza, the brother of Ahmad Shah and Prince Regent. After Ahmad Shah's departure from Iran, Mohammad Hassan Mirza, the Prince Regent, had took residence in Golistan Palace and was calling it home. Golistan Palace, located in Tehran, was the official residence of Qajar kings and a symbol of their authority. Originally built in the 16th century and expanded in the 19th, it served as the center of government and the royal court. Believing himself to be the rightful heir to the throne, Mohammad Hassan Mirza claimed the palace as his own, a belief further reinforced when Ahmad Shah abandoned plans to return to Iran. As soon as the abolishment of the Qajar dynasty was ratified by the Majlis, Reza Khan wasted no time demanding that the Prince Regent be thrown out of the palace and ordered him to leave the country. The Prince Regent didn't have a great relationship with Reza Khan, but he requested an audience with him before his departure. Reza Khan refused. Crown Prince escorted by guards into a car and was taken to the border of Iraq. He pleaded that the government owed him 20,000 tomans, around $450,000 in today's money. Reza Khan settled on giving him 5,000 tomans, a quarter of that amount. The money was thrown at him in small coins at the border. His forces shortly deported Mohammad Hassan Mirza to Iraq, where he traveled to Paris to meet his brother. With the last remnants of Qajar rule gone, it was time to switch gears. A 3-day official holiday was announced, with streets lit up and fireworks shows on full display at night. The country was finally free of the Qajars, and there was nothing but great things on the horizon. These holidays were announced as a measure to excite the general populace. Despite Qajar's unpopularity among the people, the masses didn't have great excitement for the change. That didn't mean that they disapproved of it. It meant that most weren't even aware that a change of the monarchy was taking place. The everyday Iranians weren't aware of the political games each side played, the constant changes in the government, or what the politicians were up to. They respected Reza Khan for his achievements, but Reza Khan's strict personality and his stern military appearance made it harder for people to have enthusiasm for him. He wasn't a typical politician. He was older, quieter, and more reserved. Thus, the people had to be pursued into liking him. On November 2nd, Reza Khan, who had now had the title of His Imperial Highness, issued a notice as the head of the provincial government. In it, he mentioned that he had two objectives for his rule: to put into effect the true religious tenets of Islam and to work for the peace of mind and tranquility of Iranians. The announcement was another step in garnishing support from the people, but it was also a signal to the clergy. It had been 48 hours since the abolishment of the previous regime, but the ulamas of Qom, Najaf, and Karbala hadn't announced their position. Reza Khan wanted to court their approval. With Qajars out of the country, provincial and international leaders informed of the changes and the declaration made to the people, it was time to make things official. Reza Khan had to establish a Constituent Assembly to officiate his ascent to the throne. But what was a Constituent Assembly? A Constituent Assembly is a body governed for the purpose of drafting or revising a constitution, or, in this case, for creating a new political entity to rule the country. Reza Khan asked Farugi, the acting prime minister, to organize the elections for this chamber. The Ministries of War and Interior took all the precautionary methods to make sure that only the qualified candidates could make it through. For Reza Khan, a qualified candidate was anyone with a guaranteed vote in his favor. All parliament members who had voted in favor of abolishing the previous monarchy became members of the assembly by default. Urban cities held elections, more distant places had rigged elections, and some regions didn't even leave things to chance. The delegates were notified via telegram that they had to show up and represent their region. With elections and non-elections out of the way, the Constituent Assembly held its inaugural session on December 6, 1925. Reza Khan opened the chamber with a short speech and asked the members to hasten the process so the country could get back to normalcy. There was no real objection in the assembly. All members were pro-Reza Khan. Its job wasn't so much about selecting him as the next king, but to make necessary amendments to the constitution so that everything would be legitimate and official. As their first order of business, they selected Reza Khan to be the new sovereign of Iran and for the succession of his kingdom to lie in his male descendants in direct line, only if born of an Iranian mother. They also speculated that in the event of no son in the bloodline, the sovereign could designate an heir apparent subjected to parliament's approval. The only exception was that no one of Qajari descent could be chosen for this. Even after their demise, Reza Khan couldn't help but carry his grudge for the previous monarchy. Out of 260 members of the body, 257 voted in favor of changes to the constitution. Interestingly, the only members abstaining were the three people who had strongly supported Reza Khan's bid for republicanism a few years earlier. They argued that they were inherently against another monarchy and couldn't support the proposed changes. All that remained was the name of Reza Khan's new dynasty. A few months before, on May 5, 1925, the parliament had approved a broad and important piece of legislation. Through this law, all titles, civilian, trade-related, religious, and pseudo-military, were revoked. All Iranians, old and young, were required to select a family name. Reza Khan himself had decided to give up on the Sardar Sepet title, to set an example and settle on a family name. A name that embodied centuries of history, tradition, and prestige. It was an ancient language that the old kings of Persia spoke and aligned with Reza's nationalistic vision and his goal to revert his country to its past golden glory. He had settled on Pahlavi as his surname. The British, the Soviets, Turkey, and all other foreign legations in Tehran were quick to recognize Reza's new title. They didn't even wait for the Constituent Assembly to express their congratulations to the new king. Percy Lorraine, a British diplomat who served as the British representative to Tehran, wanted to make sure that the British would be one of the first countries that would recognize the rule of Reza Khan. Reza Khan and the British Empire's relationship had already been strained over their support of Qajar. Lorraine was worried that any delay in their recognition could further tarnish the goodwill between the empire and the soon-to-be king. Lorraine had personally called Reza Khan a few days after the dissolution of the Qajar monarchy, but the soon-to-be king was still waiting for an official congratulatory note from the British government. The issue got more complicated after an incident with the Soviet minister. On November 4th, the Soviets had called Reza Khan to officially congratulate his ascension to the throne. During the conversation, the Soviets had suggested the possibility of establishing an embassy in Iran, and Reza Khan had agreed to the request. What Reza Khan wasn't aware of was that until then, the only country with an ambassadorial level had been Turkey. Now the Soviets would be the second country with that level of diplomatic relations with Iran. On December 27th, Konstantin Urinev was promoted to the rank of ambassador. This meant that now the Soviets had a higher diplomatic relationship with Iran than the British. Percy Lorraine was only a senior foreign diplomat and now had to walk behind the Soviet ambassador in all political gatherings, speaking after the Soviets, and was outranked by Urinev. This offended Lorraine, and he took the issue to Moshar, the foreign minister, but the deed was done. On November 3rd, Great Britain, Turkey, Germany, and the Soviet Union all sent notes of recognition, and 5 days later, Italy, Belgium, Poland, and Egypt followed suit. United States was the only country that waited for the vote of assembly before officially recognizing the new king. But even they had expressed their sentiments of friendship beforehand. On December 12, 1925, only 1 week after the establishment of the Assembly, they concluded their work and finalized their changes to the Constitution. On December 15th, Reza Khan appeared before the delegates to be officially sworn in as the new king. In a small ceremony, Reza kneeled before Quran, the holy book of Islam, kissed the book as a sign of respect, and gave his oath. I call upon Almighty Allah as my witness and swear by the Holy Quran and all that is sacred before God to dedicate all my efforts to preserving the independence of Iran, safeguarding its borders, and protecting the rights of its people. Iranians had a new monarchy. Reza Khan was now the first of his name in the house of Pahlavi and the new king of Persia. While Reza Khan was busy legitimizing his kingdom, Ahmad Shah, exiled in Paris, sent a telegram protesting the Constituent Assembly's decision to abolish the Qajar dynasty. In the message, he declared himself the rightful king of Iran, rejecting Reza Khan's claim to the throne. As you may recall, only a few months earlier, Ahmad Shah had announced his intention to return to Iran. However, after witnessing widespread protests in cities like Tabriz, where people were calling for a regime change, he had reconsidered. Now he declared that he'll be taking his case to the League of Nations to fight Reza Khan's claim to the throne. On the very same day, all the remaining Qajar nobility still in the country extended their official congratulations to Reza, ignoring the demands of their true king. Ahmad Shah's claim to league to the nation didn't go anywhere in the end. The day after the ceremony, Foroughi, who was the acting prime minister, along with all of Reza Khan's cabinet, resigned from their posts so that the king could select a new prime minister. This was more of a formality since Reza Khan nominated him again to the post. Reza Khan was an inherently suspicious person, yet Foroughi had his complete trust. He had trusted him with the role of acting prime minister every time he had left the capital for long stretches of time, including his absence when dealing with Sheikh Qajar. What's more is that Foroughi had a good relationship with the British, and the Soviets didn't object to him either. On December 16th, Foroughi presented his new cabinet to the parliament. In this new cabinet, two figures stood out. The first was Ali Akbar Davar, appointed as Minister of Public Works and Commerce. Known for his bureaucratic skill and boundless energy, Davar would play a crucial role in shaping Iran's internal politics. The second was Abdol Hosein Teimurtash, named Minister of Court. Teimurtash, though relatively unknown and not initially part of Reza Khan's inner circle, had earned the favor of the king. His charm, wit, and tireless efforts in helping Reza Khan abolish the Qajar dynasty had caught Reza's attention. Reza Khan, eager to make a strong impression on European leaders, saw in Teimurtash the sophistication to elevate his court's image, and Teimurtash did not disappoint. Together, Teimurtash and Davar became pillars of the Pahlavi monarchy and architects of Reza's success. Although their partnership would ultimately lead to their disgrace and death only a few years later, a story we'll explore in another chapter. After the collapse of the Qajar dynasty, Teimurtash took upon organizing the coronation ceremony. Teimurtash, who was a nationalist, wanted to refer back to Iran's historic coronations, but there wasn't enough information available beyond the 200 rule of the Qajars. Reza Khan wanted nothing to do with Qajars, so Teimurtash started communication with the Europeans to get inspiration from their ceremonies. The steps were taken for a new crown to be designed as well. The new crown was made of gold and silver adorned with red velvet, reminiscent of ancient Sasanian royal crowns. The coronation ceremony took place on April 25, 1926, in the ballroom of Golistan Palace. True to his character, Reza Shah kept the event simple and dignified, shunning extravagant displays. Government representatives, senior clergy members, and foreign legations attended, along with citizens who came to honor their new king. Reza Khan arrived at the palace in a carriage drawn by 6 bay horses. Teimurtash and Foroughi followed in a separate carriage, showcasing their importance in the new monarchy. High-ranking military officials and ministers each carried a piece of the crown jewels and regalia. Among these treasures was the legendary sword World Conqueror, once wielded by King Nader Shah, a symbol of Persian strength and ambition. Famed for Nader Shah's conquests, including his capture of India's Peacock Throne. In the palace courtyard, Reza took his place atop the marble throne to receive his people, following the tradition of rulers like Fath Ali Shah. Ever a soldier, he wore his military uniform with a royal robe draped over it. A senior Tehran cleric opened the ceremony with a speech, followed by Prime Minister Foroughi, who recited verses from Ferdowsi, the national poet of the 10th century. Afterwards, Reza Khan addressed the assembly and the nation to share his vision. He spoke of his commitment to safeguarding religion as the unifying bond of the nation. He outlined the reforms he aimed to bring to education, the economy, and agriculture, and, as expected, advocated strongly for strengthening and expanding Iran's military. He promised that his rule and the actions of all who served under him would be defined by honesty, moral courage, and perseverance. After his speech, it was time for the crowning. Teimurtash stepped forward, holding the freshly crafted Pahlavi crown, a symbol of a new era. In the Qajar tradition, a royal elder would anoint the king by setting the crown upon his head. But Reza had no noble blood, no lineage to legitimize his claim, and no elder to rely on. He had come from humble beginnings, alone. Reza Khan lifted the crown and placed it on his own head. He had risen from nothing, and now he was king. Reza Shah had ascended to the throne. In the next episode of The Lion in the Sun, Reza Shah braces himself for his new position and unleashes his sweeping reforms on the land of Persia to transform and modernize the country. The Lion in the Sun is a String Studios production. For more about this episode, including the transcript, relevant photos, and documents, visit our website. You can also follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, or Facebook to stay connected. If you like this episode and our show so far, don't forget to rate the podcast and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to us from. My name is Oriana, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.